The German machine guns had been firing for what felt like forever. Trees exploded into splinters, snow mixed with smoke. Men who had marched together only hours before now lay silent across the frozen ground. Somewhere beyond the forest, hundreds of German soldiers were advancing. American lines were collapsing. The order was simple: retreat or be surrounded. Almost everyone obeyed. Almost everyone. One young American soldier stayed behind. He wasn't 6 feet tall. He wasn't heavily built. He weighed barely 110 pounds. He had no tank, no artillery, no backup. Standing alone against an entire German assault sounded less like military strategy and more like suicide. Yet what happened over the next hour would become one of the most unbelievable acts of courage ever witnessed in modern warfare. German officers later admitted they believed they were facing an entire American battalion. In reality, it was one man. His name was Audie Murphy, and his story began thousands of miles away from the battlefields of Europe, long before medals, long before headlines, before anyone knew his name. He was simply a poor farm boy from Texas. Audie Leon Murphy was born on the 20th of June 1925, near Kingston, Texas, during one of the hardest periods in American history. His family struggled every single day. Food was never guaranteed. Shoes were often passed from one child to another. Education came second to survival. By the time Audie was old enough to understand the world, he had already learned one lesson that would shape the rest of his life. Nobody was coming to save him. When his father abandoned the family, everything became even harder. His mother was left to raise 12 children almost entirely on her own. Audie quit school after the 5th grade, not because he wanted to, because the family needed another pair of working hands. He hunted squirrels, rabbits, and deer to put food on the table. Every bullet mattered. Every shot had to count. Without realizing it, the quiet teenager walking through the Texas woods was developing skills that would one day keep him alive in Europe. He became patient. He learned to move without making noise. He could judge distance instinctively. Most importantly, he never wasted ammunition. Nobody around him imagined that these simple survival skills would later become weapons against one of the most powerful armies in the world. Then came the 7th of December, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed America overnight. Like millions of young Americans, Audie wanted to join the military immediately. But there was one problem. He looked far younger than his age. He was short, thin, and severely underweight. The Marines rejected him. The Navy rejected him. The Army initially wasn't interested either. For many recruiters, he simply didn't look like someone capable of surviving combat. But Audie refused to accept no as an answer. His older sister helped alter documents so he could enlist after turning 17. Finally, the United States Army accepted him. Even after joining, few people believed he would become a good soldier. Some instructors questioned whether he was physically strong enough. Others thought his quiet personality suggested a lack of aggression. They couldn't have been more wrong. During basic training, Murphy rarely spoke. He simply watched, learned, practiced. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was preparing himself. In early 1943, he crossed the Atlantic with the 3rd Infantry Division. Like thousands of other young Americans, he had no idea what waited for him. Italy became his first battlefield. The reality of war destroyed every illusion almost immediately. The sounds, the smell, the chaos. Nothing resembled the training exercises back home. Artillery shook the ground day and night. German snipers seemed invisible. Mines hid beneath roads and fields. Every village became another deadly maze. Many new soldiers froze during their first firefight. Audie didn't. This Audie didn't. His hunting instincts returned naturally. Stay low, move carefully, watch everything, waste nothing. His fellow soldiers quickly noticed something unusual. Murphy never seemed to panic. Fear existed. Everyone felt fear. The difference was that fear never controlled him. As Allied forces pushed through Sicily and into mainland Italy, his reputation quietly began growing. Not because he talked about bravery, because other soldiers kept witnessing it again and again. During one engagement, his unit came under intense machine gun fire. Most men were pinned down. Movement meant death. Murphy crawled forward alone, inch by inch, using every crater, every bush, every shadow. He reached the enemy position before the Germans even realized someone had approached. Within minutes, the machine gun that had trapped an entire American platoon fell silent. That wasn't luck. It became a pattern. His officers started assigning him increasingly dangerous missions. Reconnaissance, forward observation, flanking movements. Whenever something seemed impossible, someone would eventually say, "Send Murphy." Each successful mission brought promotions: private, corporal, sergeant. But rank meant very little to him. His only concern was bringing as many of his men home alive as possible. By late 1944, the war entered one of its bloodiest phases. After the Allied landings in Normandy, American forces pushed rapidly across France. The German army, although retreating, remained incredibly dangerous. Veteran divisions continued fighting with remarkable determination. The forests of eastern France became killing grounds. Visibility was poor, roads were narrow. Every hill could hide another ambush. Every village might already be occupied. Winter arrived early. Snow covered abandoned equipment and frozen bodies alike. Exhaustion spread through both armies. But Germany was preparing one final desperate effort to stop the Allied advance. Its commanders believed they could still slow the Americans long enough to negotiate a better end to the war. Among the units standing directly in their path was Audie Murphy. None of the men knew it. Within weeks, Murphy would perform the action that military historians still struggle to believe actually happened. One burning tank, hundreds of German soldiers, a battlefield covered in smoke, and one American who refused to leave, even after receiving the order to retreat. The morning of the 26th of January 1945 began in complete silence. A thick layer of snow covered the fields surrounding the small French village of Holtzwihr. To anyone looking from a distance, the landscape seemed peaceful, but beneath that frozen calm, two armies were preparing for one of the fiercest clashes of the winter campaign. Murphy's company had already suffered devastating losses during the previous weeks. Many of the men standing beside him were replacement young soldiers who had never fought together before. Some had arrived only days earlier. They barely knew each other's names. Across the frozen fields, hidden behind trees and shattered farmhouses, German forces were gathering for a massive counterattack. These weren't exhausted rearguard units. They included experienced infantry supported by tanks and self-propelled guns. Their mission was clear: break through the American lines, recapture the village, force the Allies to retreat. At first, only distant artillery could be heard. A low rumble rolled across the frozen countryside. Then came the explosion. The first shells landed behind the American positions. The next ones landed directly among them. Snow erupted into towering white clouds mixed with dirt and steel fragments. Within seconds, the quiet morning disappeared beneath smoke, fire, and screaming metal. Murphy immediately realized something. This wasn't another probing attack. This was the main assault. German infantry emerged from the woods in waves. Machine guns opened fire. Mortars crashed around the American foxholes. The battlefield became impossible to see clearly. Communication lines were breaking. Orders barely reached the front. Then the tanks appeared. Huge dark silhouettes slowly emerged through the smoke. Their engines echoed across the frozen fields like thunder. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy the entire American position. Murphy quickly assessed the situation. His company had only a fraction of its original strength remaining. They lacked anti-tank weapons. A prolonged fight meant certain destruction. One by one, American positions began falling back. The German advance continued almost without interruption. Murphy knew the truth before anyone said it aloud. If the enemy crossed the field, the battle was over. His commanding officers ordered the surviving soldiers to withdraw towards secondary defensive positions. It was the only realistic option. Murphy looked around. His men hesitated. Some were wounded. Others were exhausted beyond words. They needed someone to make the decision. Murphy shouted for them to retreat. One after another, they began moving toward the rear. Several later admitted they believed Murphy was retreating with them. He wasn't. Instead, he turned around, completely alone. In front of him stood advancing German infantry. Behind him, his own men were disappearing into the smoke. Then something caught his eye. An American tank destroyer had been hit moments earlier. Its crew had escaped. The vehicle was burning fiercely. Most soldiers would have avoided it. Its ammunition could explode at any second. Murphy ran toward it. Flames poured from the engine compartment. Black smoke rose high into the winter sky. The meadow was already becoming dangerously hot. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the burning vehicle. Mounted on top was a .50 caliber Browning machine gun, one of the most powerful infantry weapons available. The Germans had not expected anyone to occupy the destroyed vehicle. For several precious seconds, they ignored it. Murphy seized the opportunity. He opened fire. The heavy machine gun roared across the battlefield. Its bullets ripped through the advancing German formation. Entire sections instinctively dropped to the ground. Others searched desperately for cover that barely existed in the open snow. German officers immediately believed they had encountered a prepared defensive stronghold. They ordered supporting fire against the burning tank destroyer. Machine gun bullets slammed into the steel around Murphy. Mortar rounds exploded nearby. Tank cannons fired directly at his position. The vehicle shook violently with every impact. Flames continued spreading beneath him. At any moment, the fuel or ammunition could ignite. Still, he refused to move. Using the radio field telephone still connected to artillery headquarters, Murphy calmly reported enemy positions. Every observation he made guided American artillery onto the advancing German formations. Minutes later, the first shells landed. Perfectly. Explosions erupted among the German infantry. Entire attack formations broke apart. Confusion spread rapidly. Officers struggled to reorganize their men. Murphy adjusted the artillery again. Another barrage. Closer, more accurate. German soldiers later described the bombardment as relentless. From their perspective, it seemed impossible that one isolated American position could coordinate such devastating fire. Many assumed dozens of observers were hidden throughout the area. There was only one, Murphy. As the attack intensified, German troops began concentrating all available firepower on the burning vehicle. Bullets punched through the steel shield protecting the machine gun. Fragments sliced through Murphy's clothing. Then he was hit. A bullet struck his leg. The pain was immediate. Blood quickly soaked his trousers. For most soldiers, that wound alone would have ended the fight. Murphy barely reacted. He continued firing, changing ammunition belts, calling artillery, scanning enemy movements. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The German assault repeatedly stalled. Each attempt to advance met devastating machine gun fire, followed almost instantly by artillery explosions. The attackers began believing they faced a much larger American force hidden behind the smoke. That illusion changed everything. Instead of pressing aggressively, German units slowed down. Some stopped entirely. Others spread out, fearing ambushes. The momentum of the attack disappeared. Exactly what Murphy had hoped would happen. Behind him, the surviving Americans reached their new defensive line. Officers realized something astonishing. The Germans weren't pursuing. Someone, somehow, was holding them back. Only then did they understand. Murphy was still there, alone, standing on top of a burning armored vehicle, fighting what appeared to be an entire battalion. The burning tank destroyer had become the center of the battlefield. Smoke poured into the gray winter sky, making it almost impossible to see clearly. Every few seconds, another shell exploded nearby, showering Murphy with dirt, snow, and pieces of twisted steel. His left leg throbbed with every movement. Blood continued running into his boot, yet he never stopped firing. The heavy Browning machine gun echoed across the frozen fields. with a rhythm that convinced the Germans they were facing a fully defended American position. Murphy knew he could not destroy the entire attacking force. He didn't have enough ammunition. He didn't have enough time. His objective was something far more important: delay them. Every minute he remained alive was another minute for his company to reorganize. Another minute for American artillery to keep firing. Another minute for reinforcements to move closer. That single decision changed everything. German officers repeatedly tried to push their infantry forward. Each attempt ended the same way. The moment soldiers left cover, Murphy opened fire. Those who survived threw themselves back into the snow. The attack slowed again. The battlefield became a deadly cycle. Advance, machine gun fire, artillery barrage, retreat, repeat. One German platoon attempted to flank the American position through a line of trees. Murphy spotted a movement almost immediately. Instead of waiting, he shifted the machine gun and swept the entire tree line. Branches shattered. Snow exploded from the ground. The flanking movement disappeared before it could even begin. Another group tried advancing behind one of the tanks. Murphy called in artillery directly in front of the armored vehicles. Massive explosions erupted, forcing both infantry and armor to halt once again. To the Germans, it made no sense. How could one position react so quickly to every movement? How could American artillery already know exactly where to fire? The answer was simple. One man never stopped watching. Murphy had spent years hunting through forests in Texas, hours of remaining perfectly still, watching, waiting, noticing tiny movements that others overlooked. Those instincts now allowed him to read the battlefield almost effortlessly. He noticed officers signaling with their arms. He recognized infantry changing formation. He anticipated attacks before they happened. Every observation became another artillery correction, another devastating barrage. As the battle dragged on, German commanders grew increasingly frustrated. Reports coming from the front became confusing. Some units believed they were fighting multiple machine gun nests. Others insisted they were American tanks hidden behind the smoke. Several officers estimated they faced at least a reinforced company. None imagined truth. Murphy was completely alone. Eventually, the flames beneath the tank destroyer became impossible to ignore. The fire spread closer to the ammunition storage. Black smoke surrounded the machine gun. The heat became unbearable. Any second the vehicle could explode. Even Murphy later admitted he knew he was running out of time. Then, something changed. The volume of German fire suddenly decreased. Murphy looked across the battlefield. The enemy advance had finally stalled. Large groups of German soldiers were taking cover instead of moving forward. They believed they had reached the strongest part of the American defense. It was the opportunity Murphy had been waiting for. Grabbing his field radio one final time, he contacted the American artillery observer. His message was short. The enemy attack has stopped. Now was the moment. Almost immediately, another wave of artillery shells crashed into the German lines. This barrage was even heavier than the previous one. Explosions tore across the open fields. Smoke completely covered the battlefield. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Murphy finally climbed down from the burning vehicle. His wounded leg nearly gave way beneath him. Only then did the full pain begin to register. He had been fighting almost entirely on adrenaline. Now every step hurt, but he wasn't finished. Instead of heading toward safety, he limped back toward his company. When he reached the American line, the surviving soldiers stared at him in disbelief. Many had assumed he was already dead. Others couldn't understand how anyone could survive what they had just witnessed. Murphy didn't celebrate. He didn't give a speech. He simply pointed toward the smoke-covered fields. The Germans are stopped. Then he did something almost unbelievable. Instead of remaining behind the defensive line because of his wound, he organized a counterattack. The exhausted Americans followed him, not because of his rank, because after seeing what he had done, no one doubted him anymore. They advanced through the smoke. Step by step, the Germans, already shaken by the relentless artillery and convinced they had faced a much larger force, began pulling back. Several abandoned equipment as they retreated. Others left wounded comrades behind in the confusion. Within a short time, Holtzwihr remained in American hands. The German assault had failed. Only after the battlefield fell silent did officers begin piecing together exactly what had happened. Radio operators confirmed Murphy had directed artillery almost continuously. Witnesses reported he had remained on the burning tank destroyer for nearly an hour. Medical personnel finally examined his leg. The wound was serious, yet he had ignored it until the battle ended. His commanding officers struggled to believe the reports. Surely other soldiers had been helping him. Surely another machine gun had supported his position. Surely additional observers had been nearby. Investigation after investigation reached the same conclusion. There had been no one else. One wounded American soldier had delayed an entire German attack long enough to save his company. Years later, German veterans who participated in the battle admitted they believed they had encountered a much larger American force. Some estimated an entire battalion. Others believed armored reinforcements had already arrived. The psychological effect of Murphy's actions had become as powerful as the machine gun itself. He hadn't simply fired bullets. He had manipulated the enemy's perception. By convincing experienced German officers they faced overwhelming resistance, he had destroyed the momentum of their assault. Military historians still study Holtzwihr today because it demonstrates one of the oldest truths in warfare. Victory doesn't always belong to the largest army. Sometimes it belongs to the soldier who refuses to give up 1 minute longer than everyone expects. When the smoke finally cleared over Holtzwihr, the battlefield looked almost unreal. Burned out vehicles stood frozen where they had fallen. The snow, once white, was covered with dirt, shattered equipment, and the scars of artillery craters. American medics moved from one wounded soldier to another. Engineers began clearing the roads. Officers walked the battlefield, trying to understand how such a small force had survived one of the strongest German attacks in the region. Again and again, the reports led back to the same name, Audie Murphy. The young Texan, who had been considered too small for military service, had just accomplished something that seemed impossible. Military investigators interviewed every available witness. They compared radio logs with artillery records. They examined the destroyed tank destroyer that Murphy had used as his final fighting position. The evidence left no room for doubt. Everything had happened exactly as the surviving soldiers described. While wounded, while completely alone, standing on top of a burning armored vehicle that could have exploded at any moment, Murphy had held back an entire German assault long enough for his company to survive. For those actions, the United States Army awarded him the nation's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor. The citation described extraordinary courage beyond the call of duty. But even those carefully chosen military words struggled to capture what had actually happened that freezing January morning. Murphy accepted the medal with the same quiet humility that had followed him throughout the war. He rarely spoke about himself. Whenever journalists asked about his heroism, he usually redirected the conversation toward the men who never came home. To him, they were the real heroes. By the end of World War II, Audie Murphy had become the most decorated American combat soldier of the entire conflict. His list of awards was extraordinary. The Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with V for Valor, 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat, and dozens of American, French, and Belgian decorations recognizing his courage. He had earned more than 30 major military awards before his 21st birthday, yet those medals came at a price. Like millions of veterans returning from Europe and the Pacific, Murphy carried invisible wounds. Nightmares haunted his sleep. Sudden noises triggered memories of artillery. He often replayed the faces of friends who had died beside him. Today, we recognize these symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder. But in the 1940s, few people understood what combat trauma truly meant. Many veterans suffered in silence. Murphy refused to hide what he was experiencing. Years later, he openly discussed his struggles with insomnia, anxiety, and recurring memories of battle. At a time when mental health was rarely discussed, especially among soldiers, his honesty encouraged countless other veterans to seek help instead of suffering alone. His courage did not end when the war ended. It simply took a different form. Hollywood soon became interested in the young war hero. His remarkable story seemed almost impossible to believe. He appeared in several films and eventually starred as himself in the movie To Hell and Back, based on his autobiography. Released in 1955, the film became one of the highest-grossing war movies of its era. Audiences were fascinated, not because Murphy looked like the traditional action hero, but because they knew every major battle shown on screen had actually happened. The man portraying the hero was the hero. Even after becoming famous, Murphy remained deeply connected to military causes. He spent years supporting veterans organizations and speaking about the long-term effects of combat. He never allowed people to forget those who had sacrificed everything. On the 28th of May 1971, tragedy struck once again. Murphy was traveling aboard a small private aircraft through the mountains of Virginia when it crashed during poor weather. There were no survivors. He was only 45 years old. News of his death spread across the United States within hours. Thousands paid tribute. Veterans who had served beside him remembered not only his courage, but his loyalty. Military leaders honored him as one of the greatest soldiers in American history. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Today, visitors still notice something unusual. Unlike many famous graves decorated with elaborate monuments, Murphy requested a simple headstone. Modest, quiet, exactly the way he had lived. Every year, thousands of Americans stop there to pay their respects. Many leave coins, others leave small American flags. Some simply stand in silence, remembering a young man who never saw himself as extraordinary. Military academies continue teaching the Battle of Holtzwihr as an example of leadership under impossible conditions. Historians still analyze how one determined soldier managed to delay a force many times larger than his own. Psychologists study the mindset that allowed him to remain calm while standing on a burning vehicle under direct enemy fire. And veterans continue drawing inspiration from his words. Murphy once said, "The real heroes are the men who gave their lives." Perhaps that sentence explains him better than any medal ever could. He never fought for fame. He never fought for recognition. He fought for the soldiers beside him, for the country he loved, for the belief that sometimes one person can make the difference between defeat and survival. More than 80 years have passed since the guns fell silent across Europe. The tanks have rusted away. The battlefields have become peaceful fields once again. But courage leaves traces that time cannot erase. And somewhere in the quiet village of Holtzwihr, where snow once mixed with fire and steel, history still remembers the day an entire German assault was stopped by a single American soldier who simply refused to retreat. If this story surprised you, remember that history is filled with incredible moments that almost sound like fiction, except they really happened. Subscribe to Echoes of Valor, where every week we uncover true stories of courage, sacrifice, and the extraordinary men and women who changed history forever. Because legends are not born from myths. They are born from real people who made impossible choices. The end.